Good day to those of you in the US, and good afternoon and good evening to those of you in Europe and in Africa. Thank you so much for joining us for an important discussion of the issues facing women in sub-Saharan Africa, and for this initial session of EmpowerHer, a program sponsored by the MicroLoan Foundation to help 50,000 vulnerable women and girls start or maintain their micro businesses before the end of the year. I'm Steve Mark, based in Boston, Mass, United States, and I have the honor of serving as the board chair for MicroLoan Foundation USA, the US arm of the MicroLoan Foundation. We operate approximately 30 branch locations in Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, and typically we'll be supporting over 30,000 women at any one time. We provide financial literacy training, business mentoring, and microloans to women entrepreneurs. I'm honored to be joined by Medha Wilson, our group CEO, who's based in London, for an update on the increasingly dire issues facing women and girls in sub-Saharan Africa. Medha, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Steve. Thank you so much for that. It's great to have so many people on the call today, and from all over the world too. So as Steve said, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I am aware that some of the people on this call may be familiar with our work because we have some donors and partners joining us on the call today, and there are others who probably not so familiar with the work we do at MicroLoan. So for the benefit of everyone, I'll do a quick introduction of myself and MicroLoan Foundation, just to set the scene for the discussion today. So I'm Medha Wilson, Group CEO of MicroLoan Foundation. As you've heard from Steve, MicroLoan Foundation is a poverty alleviation and women's empowerment charity, helping women in sub-Saharan Africa work themselves out of poverty. We do this by providing loans for women to start, expand their businesses, and we always complement this with ongoing financial skills and business skills training, which is a very important component of our loan program. I've been part of the MicroLoan family for just over 2 years. I started in 2018, having spent nearly a decade in financial inclusion, working in markets in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. And I have to say the last 2 years at MicroLoan Foundation have been fulfilling on so many levels, especially because of the inspiration that I derive from the women entrepreneurs that we serve in some of the toughest markets in the world. So I'm really looking forward to sharing more about our work and having an interactive session with everyone today. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Medha. Welcome. Well, why don't we start with the overall situation? A lot of research has shown that women and girls are disproportionately impacted by crises, and COVID-19 is no exception. The UN estimates that an additional 47 million women and girls around the world will lapse into extreme poverty in this year due to the pandemic. That means they would be living on under $2.25 per day. It's a very, very dire situation. Maybe, Medha, you can talk a little bit about specifically what we're seeing on the ground in Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe facing women and girls this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this pandemic has had an unprecedented impact on the lives and livelihoods of on a global scale, but more so in the countries that we work in, simply because we work with some of the most vulnerable populations around the world. And gender inequality has actually worsened as a result of this pandemic. In some of these countries that we work in, gender norms are structured in a way that the burden of childcare, additional childcare and family responsibilities have increased on women. And this means that they're spending less time in income generating activities. So that's seen a decrease in income that they're getting from their livelihoods. And it's causing a lot of them to stop working, etc. So it's putting them several decades behind in terms of the progress that they've made. You're right, absolutely. I mean, 47 million women, more women below the poverty line is a very, very stark statistics. And this is something that calls for an urgent call to action. I mean, it requires us to work cohesively to try and combat this reversal of all the progress that we've made. And we're seeing this increasingly in the livelihoods of the women that we serve in these countries. Women have, the restrictions have been varied. So in Zimbabwe, for example, we've seen a complete lockdown for over 2 months in an already battered economy. So this has been very, very serious. In Zambia, we've had localized lockdowns. And in Malawi, we've sort of toyed with the idea of lockdowns, but it's just created a general air of uncertainty, causing a lot of disruption to economic activity for women. But what this means is there has been social distancing measures. So, it's impacted our ability to disperse loans because ours is a high touch approach where we work very closely with women in groups. With social distancing measures, this has made it more difficult for us to disperse loans and collect repayments. It's made it difficult for women also to, sell their produce, access to markets or access to raw materials, etc. And this has caused an undue strain on the lives of many. So it's not an easy task. We're sort of monitoring the situation, working with women to overcome the effects of this pandemic. Luckily, we've been spared with, a complete lockdown situation in many of these countries. But this is an ongoing issue, and it calls for a need to monitor this quite carefully and adapt our methodology to better serve these women.
Right, thank you. So what are some of the barriers? You touched on some of them already, but what are some of the barriers for facing women for receiving support, whether it's from microloan or other sources, given the situations that they're in and given that the women we serve are typically in the most rural and remote locations?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting one because during this pandemic, because it's on such a global scale, we've seen support, governmental support in many of the developed countries, say like the UK and USA, where a lot of people have been, provided with packages to weather the storm. And we're talking, in countries like the ones we operate in, these, even pre-COVID, have found themselves in a very fragile economic situation, be it, Zimbabwe's macroeconomic challenges, Zambia's debt burden, or Malawi's inherent, structural weakness. They do not have the systems and mechanisms to cope with a pandemic of this scale and to provide the necessary social, safety nets to the most vulnerable sections of the society. We've seen some instances of both the Zambian and Malawian governments offering cash transfers to the most vulnerable sections of the society as a result of this pandemic in the early days. And most of them are done through mobile money and digital finance. And one of the barriers is we find that there's a gender bias in this because it's the number of women owning mobile phones is less than the percentage of men owning a mobile device. And often, many of them are excluded from this because to set up a mobile account or, an account with a financial institution, one requires, a digital, an identification document, financial literacy, digital skills, etc. And women find themselves at a disadvantage even getting to that first step. So if you don't have the means to receive the support, then you're more disadvantaged as a result of that. So that's one of the barriers. I mean, we have found that over the years, both Malawi and Zambia have embraced, the adoption of a national ID, etc. But there's still some work to be done on that front. And in Malawi, where we operate, most of our business is done on a cash basis. We do not have mobile money at the minute. So, the impact of these governmental measures and supporting these women is yet to be seen. And from our perspective, I think we are increasingly looking at digitizing operations. It's called, it's become more urgent, especially in Malawi, where we don't have mobile money. We've always had plans to go mobile, but I think this has accelerated that process, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And certainly some of the infrastructure challenges that are well beyond MicroLoan Foundation really put an extra burden in rolling out digital support in a place like Malawi, where infrastructure coverage for mobile phones and those sorts of devices is much less than in the other countries we operate in Zambia and Zimbabwe.
Yeah, and sorry, I also have to add that, a good thing from all of this is the governments, and at the policy level, we're seeing changes, especially with regards to digital transformation, where we're seeing governments say they're going to try and reduce fees on mobile money transfers, and, onboarding of clients is going to be slightly easier with fewer KYC requirements, etc. So that's the positives of it. And we are, especially in Malawi, we want to take advantage of that situation and actually embrace this digital transformation in a holistic way. Yeah.
Wonderful. Maybe you can spend just a couple minutes with a little bit more information around the objectives of MicroLoan Foundation and what we're trying to accomplish, and why our work, particularly the training and financial literacy that we provide, is so important right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So MicroLoan, the foundation's vision is for those living in poverty, have the opportunity to improve the lives of not just themselves, but their families. And the mission is really to provide the tools and skills necessary for women in rural sub-Saharan Africa work themselves out of poverty. And like I mentioned earlier in my introduction, we do this by providing loans and training, a robust training program in financial literacy and business skills to enable these women to take their first steps out of poverty. Our work really covers broadly three sustainable development goals. So we are looking to tackle the SDG 1, which is no poverty. And we are working in some of the poorest countries in the world. I mean, if you look at the statistics, out of the 20 out of 28 of the poorest countries in the world, 27 of them are in sub-Saharan Africa. Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe feature in that list. So we're really tackling poverty heads on. We're doing that by focusing on countries where it is really prevalent and predominant. So that's SDG 1. And we also look at addressing the Sustainable Development Goal 2, which is no hunger. A part of our program is also to provide agricultural loans, because at the end of the day, when we look at these economies, over 70 to 80% of our clients are smallholder farmers. So we're constantly finding means and ways to better provide services, for these clients to meet their needs. And one way we do this is by providing agricultural input loans. So through our crop officers, we provide extensive training in conservation farming, etc., which addresses food security, the goal of food security, but also enhances the output of these farms. So these women are not only able to feed themselves and their families, but they're able to generate a surplus income, which then they can, sell on to the market and gain additional income for their household. So it's also tackling no hunger. And the last goal is, of course, the obvious one is SDG 5, which is gender equality. So through our work, we're really trying to influence a change in mindset for women, their attitudes towards risk-taking, financial independence, etc. And through their success, we're trying to demonstrate that, they have better rights over asset ownership and decision-making, not just within their household, but at the community level. So those are broadly the objectives of MicroLoan Foundation. And you touched upon training. I think that's one of our USPs, really. We're setting up these women to succeed. And I think many of these women, if you think about it, are illiterate, have had no experience in entrepreneurship or in financial literacy, etc. So the training is a very important component of our program. Before onboarding the client, it's 2 months of rigorous training that is provided to potential clients in the community by our loan and training officers to ensure that they grasp these concepts and they have the necessary tools to actually make this work for them. Savings is something that we emphasize on from the very start, because we need savings for rainy day, and we're seeing that increasingly at times like this. It is a sort of a cushion that helps many of our clients weather the storm. And all of this forms a part of our training component. And then once they grasp these concepts and are absolutely confident in all of the things that have been taught to them, they are then onboarded as clients and then start their journey with MicroLoan.
I think that's a really important point, Medha, and I think it's one of the unique things about MicroLoan Foundation that not only do we make sure that training is part of the program, but we don't actually disperse any funds to anybody until they've gone through the rigorous training that you mentioned. And so what we're trying to accomplish is to provide enduring life skills for women and their families to change the trajectory of their families. And we look at a range of quantitative measures to determine the impact of what we do, and we see a dramatic reduction, as an example, in food insecurity. You mentioned, obviously, one of the SDG goals is no hunger. And so reducing the amount of time per year that a woman and her family is insecure about having enough food is absolutely critical, because if you don't have sustenance, how can you actually do any work, even however resourceful you may be or whatever great ideas you may have for a business. And what we see is that typically the women that we serve, our clients, have 4 to 5 dependents. And having worked with over 240,000 women over the last 18 years, we've been able to support over 1.2 million people, including the women and their families. And by providing the training, as you mentioned, that puts them in a very different position to be able to help themselves and their families. So one of the questions on the table for us right now is, how do we help more women this year when the need is more dire than ever? And we, like many organizations, are facing operational challenges ourselves. We need to make sure that we keep our employees safe. They're all local staff. We want to make sure that their health is protected. We also want to make sure that we can expand our program to help people who need it. So maybe you can talk a little bit, Medha, about the EmpowerHer program that we're putting into place to be able to get to 50,000 women and girls by the end of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the premise for this is really this pandemic has set us back quite a few years in terms of all the progress that we've made. It threatens to reverse the progress that we've made towards poverty alleviation and gender equality, etc., just to name a few. And it really, like I mentioned before, it requires a call to action. And EmpowerHer is doing exactly that. We want to ensure that we can support as many women as possible in continuing our journeys, in expanding their livelihoods, in generating incomes for their families, and are not threatened by the devastating impacts of this pandemic. So our bold ambition is to help 50,000 women by the end of this year, either start their journey with us or continue their journey with us in order to build resilience in their own lives. And that's precisely what we're aiming to do through this campaign. It's very apt at this point in time because, like I said, we as institutions also find ourselves in a very fragile state. You know, the pandemic this is a cash dependent business, you know, microfinance. When clients are not able to repay, it affects our ability to disperse. And so we have to also constantly look at, from an institutional point of view, how do we build resilience within our own systems to weather these shocks, to be able to better serve these women. And our ultimate goal is to maximize our impact. So we have to be sound in our financial structure and in our mechanisms to be able to serve more women. And this is really, EmpowerHer is really touching upon all these aspects to ensure that we can have as much of an impact as possible.
That's great. So what are we doing? What are the specific things that we are doing as part of the campaign to provide additional training and support, or other sorts of things as part of Empower?
Yeah, I mean, I think very crucial to our modus operandi, if you want to call it that, is having a very client-centric approach. So even pre-COVID, one of the key components of how we deliver services to our clients is actually listening to them. And that, given our very hands-on approach, we know our customer very well. And at times like this, it's about really listening to these clients and having a very customized, tailored approach based on individual circumstances. And we're able to do that because our loan and training officers and branch managers are based in these rural areas and have, very frequent contact with these clients. So it involves providing additional training and coping mechanisms and listening to them to understand what their needs are at this point in time. So as an institution, we have looked at rescheduling loans for clients. For example, if they're not able to meet repayments now, can we be more flexible in altering the terms of repayment, in altering the length of the loan, for instance? Can we look at emergency loan capital? Because somebody, a client might say, oh, we would like an additional loan to set up this, or we're facing this difficulty. Can we access more capital? And we've been able to do that too. And then there may be a third instance where we may have to actually write off loans because that loan may be too much of a financial burden at this point in time, given the circumstances. So it's really about being proactive, and we've managed to do that both in Zambia and Malawi to a large extent, and in Zimbabwe too. And we've complemented this by doing some COVID surveys. So we've sampled about a few clients and got responses from them as to how this pandemic has impacted their lives and what they think we could do better in servicing them. And the results from this exercise actually have corroborated some of the efforts that we've taken on the ground. So that's very positive for us. The other thing that we're looking at to we've talked about this, digital transformation is something that's inevitable at a time like this. We have seen that businesses can come to a standstill because we're not able to have that face-to-face interaction with clients. And I think going completely digital, I think I'm slightly wary of that because the USP of how we operate is having that hands-on approach with clients. It's high-touch approach, but can we be high-touch with a little bit of digital so that there is continuity in the provision of services? We are already in the front foot, in terms of our operations in Zambia and Zimbabwe to some extent because we had already adopted mobile money in the last couple of years. So clients were able to make repayments, and we as an institution have not suffered from cash flow issues because we were able to get those repayments back. But in Malawi, we have struggled a little bit because majority of our transactions are in cash, and we've not had the opportunity to go digital thus far. But this is something that we are tackling right now, and our ambition is really to leverage mobile money in the next few months, because there have been initiatives, like I said, on the ground to make this possible, and we're looking into it at the minute.
Wonderful. So we're getting towards the half-hour mark, and that was the plan for our time. I wanted just to mention a couple things. If anybody who is listening and watching the webinar today has a question, feel free to type it into the Q&A box or the chat box at the bottom of your screen. We're monitoring those, and we'll be happy to address those. One of the questions that did come in was, how has COVID affected the loan repayment and bad debt statistics? I think you just hit on that, Medha, and I think an important part of your commentary was that we take a very personalized approach to working with each of the women that is a client of MicroLoan. And so by working on each individual situation and determining whether there's an opportunity to restructure, and that would be the best thing for the woman and her business and family, or to write the loan off, those are decisions that we are making on a day-to-day basis. And because we are in a situation where our first and foremost priority is to make sure that the financial well-being of the women and families we serve is paramount, we're willing to make those choices, even though they're not the best financially for MicroLoan Foundation, but it's the right thing for the client, because we do not want to have someone in a situation where they're over indebted and really changes the trajectory of their life. That can have a really significant negative impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I should add to that, Steve, if I may. one of the results of the COVID survey that we did in both Zambia and Malawi was that how are clients coping? What mechanisms are they using to cope during this pandemic? And it was interesting to find that savings component formed a majority of those responses, where they were able to dip into their savings. While that is seen as a positive coping mechanism, dipping in too much could also move very quickly to a negative, because if you've spent all of your savings to cope during this time, you do not have a safety net anymore. And many clients have also resorted to borrowing from friends and families, etc., which we consider negative coping, or selling assets like livestock, etc. So I think this personalized approach helps us work with clients to ensure that they're not moving towards those negative coping mechanisms, and to see how best we can offer services so that they can tide through this.
Great. A question came in regarding the loans and how they're structured. What's the average loan amount? And I know that varies from country to country, but maybe just a high level on that would be helpful.
Sorry, did you say average loan size? Average
loan size, and how the loans are structured. The 16-week period and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so we do a combination of 4-month or 6-month loans, and in each of our countries, and the average loan size is roughly about, say, $75 to $80 today. Our starting loan sizes can be as small as $20, perhaps even lower, given Zimbabwe and the way the exchange rate is going at the minute. But yeah, the average loan size sort of averages between $75 and $80. The loans are structured in a way that we have group lending methodology. So women are given loans in groups of 5. There's no collateral. The social the guarantee, group guarantee, is the only collateral that we have in place. And yeah, that's how we operate in all 3 markets.
Great.
Did that answer the question? Yeah.
Great. One question came in regarding just a little bit more about the plans to go digital. Obviously, with their infrastructure challenges, we have different countries in different situations, where Zambia and Zimbabwe are further ahead of Malawi. But I know we are trying to make some progress on the digital front in Malawi, and maybe a couple of comments there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a challenging environment. Infrastructure is weaker in Malawi, we have seen, than it has in Zambia and Zimbabwe, because a lot depends on, you may want to go digital, but are there agents in the areas, in the most remote areas that we operate in, etc. Those are the questions that still remain unanswered. However, progress has been made. There have been a lot of efforts on the ground, especially from mobile operators, etc., to reach some of the deeper pockets in the country. And we are investing in, we've secured some funding to start a pilot in some of the more advanced branches. So say a Lilongwe, which is a town, Blantyre city, typically would have more access points. And so our ambition is really to test this out first in these more advanced branches, and then have a comprehensive training program with all our loan officers and staff. It requires integration into our core banking system. The mobile operator, Airtel or MTN, whoever we're operating with, has to be integrated into our management information system. And then it requires training even at the client level. So it is, I think, estimated to take a few months before it can be fully rolled out, and it requires significant investment in human capital and technology. Yeah.
Right. And clearly a lot of controls and management processes as well.
Yeah.
I know we're doing...
want to take advantage of the fact that there's a drive, at the government level and at the operator level to reduce transaction costs, etc. So it is more viable for us to do so now.
Great. One question came in around climate change. What's the impact of climate change on our operations and the countries that we are operating in?
Yeah, I mean, climate change is a serious concern, especially in the countries that we operate in. I mean, we are prone to droughts and floods and other natural disasters, and women often find themselves in the nucleus of a households. Whether it's getting water, food, etc. So they are impacted the most by the effects of climate change, and this is something that is quite serious and requires an effort at all levels. So from policy, government intervention, etc., and we as microfinance institutions, and how we can help clients adapt to the effects of climate change. So one of the things that we're also exploring in the future is to develop a microinsurance product, because majority of our clients, like I said before, are smallholder farmers. They are prone to the effects of climate change, and then they do not have the coping mechanisms. So their reliance on agricultural income puts them in a very vulnerable position. So how can we address this? By providing additional services. Microinsurance, weather index livestock insurance is one way of overcoming some of these obstacles, and that is something that we're looking into as well.
Great. Here's an interesting question. What's the interaction between the women that we serve and their male counterparts, whether they be village elders, husbands? That's an interesting dynamic as we often see.
Yeah. So we as an organization, 100% of our client base are women. We do have center meetings. Before we open a branch, say in a new village or town, our approach is really to have buy-in from everybody in that community. So it's the village headman, we go and have long discussions with them and all the members of the group. So when we have, introduction sessions about what MicroLoan does, how our loan program works, etc., both men and women participate in that. And we emphasize that we focus on women because we are tackling these issues of gender inequality and poverty, which are found, women are more sort of in that bracket that we're trying to address. So I think it's an interesting dynamic because we're trying to influence change. I mean, here we're talking about countries which have the worst stats for gender, some of the worst stats for gender equality, and trying to influence change. And economic independence is one way to do that. Do they have a better say in their household finances, as a result of starting a business, generating income, etc.? Is it really leading to a change in mindset? And often we do get questions from men whether they can be a part of this program or not. And it's something that we have to grapple with on a daily basis. But I think it's we try to involve the whole community, and we're very transparent in how we operate. So it makes that buy-in at the household level much easier, if that makes sense.
Great. Maybe just take a 1 or 2 minutes to just answer how can people get involved if they're interested in Empower, and what are the things they can do, and then you can go right into another question, which is just a couple of examples of some of the actual businesses, the income generating activities that the women are doing. What kind of businesses do they have?
Okay, shall I start with that one first?
Sure.
So typically women that we serve, I mean, all of them, like I said, rely on some sort of agricultural income at some point in their, some point in the year. But in addition to that, women are mostly in the informal sector. So you'll find examples would include women selling milk, food, soya, maize, nuts, or rearing livestock, poultry, running a hardware shop. These are just some examples, and all of them are, typically tend to be in the informal sector. In border towns, especially with Zambia and Malawi, we have people engaged in cross-border trade, and for many women, that is, their main source of income. So they are not in sophisticated market mechanisms, but they're, in the informal sector, and have, small village stalls or temporary shops, which many women then go on to establish, having been with us for say 4 or 5 years, go on to establish successful businesses.
Yes, just a question that came in that's a good follow-on to that. Have you had examples of women significantly scaling their businesses such that these move beyond microfinance and typically into the more traditional debt and equity finances? In other words, have people graduated to the formal financial sector?
Yeah, I mean, increasingly we don't have, I mean, because we work with some of the poorest, it takes several loan cycles for some of these women to graduate to that level. So we do not have a large percentage of that, but we have seen significant steps that they've taken. Say, like I was just saying, they probably ran a small stall. They've gone on to establish a big business. They've gone on to establish a mill, for example, and recruited others in the community. So they're running a small and medium enterprise. And then they're starting to get, onto the radar of, say, a commercial bank, etc. So we do see some businesses in Lilongwe and, say, bigger cities where some of these SME type enterprises are coming about. But still, we find that, they're still under the radar of many of the banking institutions. And there's now an increasing need in some of these sort of peri-urban areas that we call them, for us to diversify our product offering that could perhaps also serve some of these small and medium enterprises. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what people can do. How can they become involved in the Empower Her campaign, find more information?
Yeah, so I was just going to say that right after this call, I believe my colleagues will be sending through a link to everyone who's registered. So everyone on this call will be receiving an email where you can find out a little bit more about Empower Her, their different activities that we're undertaking during the course of this week, and the different ways to get involved. So I will say, look out for that link in your email, and that'll give you all the information you need. And if you still need anything else, please feel free to reach out to us.
Yes, and in addition, I think some of you may have noticed in the chat box, I have the links. So there's both a website for MicroLoan Foundation USA and MicroLoan Foundation, which is the UK main office. Both those links are in the chat box. And again, they will be in the email. And I think they were actually in the notifications about the webinar today. So feel free to look at those. We have a wide range of information from videos and background. And there's, for those of you who would like to look at some statistics, there's financial reporting and a whole range of information that I think could give you a very nice picture, not only of MicroLoan's activities, but the environment in which we operate. I think we're getting close to time. One question, do we have any plans to extend to other countries such as the DRC? We're always very cautious about not overextending and making sure that we provide the best and most personalized service where we are operating.
Absolutely. And I think we are trying to, I think the real goal is to create operationally self-sufficient institutions. And we find that the market where we operate is huge. I mean, if you look at Malawi, we have maybe 27,000 clients today, active clients today. But 50% of Malawi's 17 million population is below the poverty line. And that is the size of the market, potential market. So there's a lot of work to be done in the countries that we already operate in, and we want to make that a success. And of course, our ambition would always be to do more of this in other countries. But I think for now, we're concentrating on the ones we have.
Absolutely. And it's just so important to make sure that what we do well. And each of the countries, to add on to what Medha was saying, has a very specific regulatory regime and government preferences. And so being able to operate successfully and seamlessly for our clients is really critical. And it's very important not to be in places where we're not 100% sure of the regulatory environment and the way that we can deliver the services that would be uninterrupted.
Yeah.
I think one final question, because we're getting close to time here, is how do we manage to reach women in these remote local areas. So remote rural areas, excuse me. And obviously that's a key part of our business model, and would love to have you chat on that.
Yeah, that's precisely that. It's our USP. We go where a bank.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you explain what USP is?
Unique selling point. Yeah. So so that's our unique selling point, is that we go where a bank doesn't. And one of the reasons why we have high operating costs is because we go to a client. Typically in a commercial bank where we live in the US and UK, we go to the bank, but here the bank comes to you. So we have loan officers who are going on their motorbikes or cars, etc., deep into these villages in these countries, in Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, and that's just something, that's a journey we undertake to get the clients in these areas. So there's no shortcuts.
Right, exactly. So it's a very high touch, personalized model, which again, when we think about the delivery of the financial literacy training and the way we deliver the training to folks is just so important. So we really need to be able to be out there. I think with that, we should wrap up. I would just like to say a very big thank you to the many people who have joined us for the past 45 minutes or so from all across Europe, Africa, and the United States. We really appreciate the support, and without your emotional support and financial support, we could not deliver the services and the training and the life skills to the women that we serve in these countries, and we greatly appreciate your interest. Please share this with your friends and colleagues, and we're always happy to answer any questions or provide more information. Medha, I'll let you wrap up.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. Thank you for the discussion today, and a special thanks to you and the team of MLF USA for your time and dedication, and for really getting the word about EmpowerHer through all your networks. Some of our donors and partners are on this call today, but a big thank you to all of them. It's because of their generosity, as you said, we're able to continue to carry out our work in some of the most difficult regions in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you to everybody else who's joined this call, and if you've been inspired by what we do and you'd like to learn more about MicroLoan and EmpowerHer and ways to support, I think I mentioned that an email will follow shortly after this call, so keep an eye for that in your inbox. And otherwise, yeah, that's about it. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, and I wish you the best. Everyone, have a great afternoon, great evening, and we will talk with you again soon.